you so much for being here. Phoebe
Yay.
is a seminary trained licensed counselor. I get to introduce her this morning for her, afternoon for us. She actually wears a lot of hats professionally. She helps people move through the overwhelm of life, which I'm so excited to learn more about, and into peace and joy. She does this through speaking, writing, helping clients in her private practice. She's also, as if that's not enough, she's also training the next generation of counselors as an assistant professor at Central Baptist Seminary. So we are so happy she's here. She lives in Oklahoma with her husband and three amazing children and enjoys a good cup of coffee. So I got myself a cup of coffee. I hope all of you have a little something. So before we get started, we're going to be diving deeper into what prevents us people from actually changing and how we can move towards change that lasts, which I know I need to learn more about. Phoebe, I would love for you to just share a little bit more about how you got called into this work, how you ended up in this position. And yeah, we're super excited to learn from you this morning.
Yeah, well, we can also add my golden doodle that we just got on Monday.
Oh my
I know
gosh.
she's super precious.
What's the
Um,
name?
Willow, my 7-year-old named her, and totally shot down every other name that I suggested. So I'm like, it's fine, it's fine.
That's
I do love
that's
the name,
amazing.
so
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Honestly, I a little bit stumbled into counseling. I had to pick a minor in college for my communication degree, and just kind of randomly took a counseling class on a whim and loved it, and had my professor just be really affirming of skills that I didn't even know that I had. And so, yeah. And then my fiance at the time, or boyfriend, I can't even remember, honestly. I live with him now. So he was like, "Hey, you've always wanted to go to seminary and want to be a counselor. Do you know that there's this seminary in Kansas City where you can do both?" And I was like, "I did not." And so we took a trip, and yeah, and then ended up in a great counseling program. So very excited for that.
That's amazing. Well, I'm really pumped to learn. I know we're going to get like into a variety of things, but I really want to get started on something that you had shared with us, that there's a lot of myths when we believe
Mm.
about when we come to change. And so I wondered if you could start us off with what are some things we believed to be true that are potentially not true when it comes to change?
Yeah. So I think the first one that I see people fall into is that, like, if I just want something bad enough, I can make it happen. Right. So this is kind of the myth of willpower, where that's really all I need is, like, if I just want it and have the willpower to do it, I'll change. And oftentimes this kind of oversimplifies the change process. And we don't see the other factors externally involved. And I think this really leads to the pitfall of shame, right?
Mm,
Because if I wanted it bad enough, then I would have made it happen. So when it doesn't happen, it's all my fault. Um, I think the second one, and this one I think is especially in like modern Western churches, is one I see a lot, is just know better, do better. That, like,
mm,
all I need to change is just to know how to change. Um, this is a piece of the puzzle. It's an important piece of the puzzle, right? But the pitfall is that if we over focus on gaining knowledge, oftentimes we don't move into implementation. And I think this can also lead to like self-righteousness. I think that's the pitfall of this one,
mm. Yeah.
is if I know better, but if I haven't done the work of actually doing better, then sometimes I think we can kind of get puffed up with pride, but not actually have the receipts to show that, like, I can do better too. And I think the last one, again, is something that I am really passionate about changing, is that the myth of my emotions aren't important. Um, I think that oftentimes I see, especially in the counseling office, people being really dismissive of their emotions. Oftentimes we hear things like "suck it up, keep going, don't cry about
Mm,
it, stop with all
mm.
the drama." Like, these are the messages that we hear growing up. And so, it's, I think we've all kind of been dismissive of our own emotions. And especially if we've grown up with people who haven't had time and space and room for us to co-regulate with us, then we become adults that either want to push our emotions away or kind of like fall into the pit of all the depths of our emotions. And I think the real pitfall with that is that if we ignore our emotions, we're really ignoring the primary fuel for change.
Yeah. I mean, So many of the things you're saying I'm resonating with. And I think that know better, do better is something that I like. You just think like, okay, this is something that I'm thinking about, so I can easily turn it into change when actually there's like a lot that goes on behind the scenes to like get there. And so one of the questions that we drafted together was, why are beliefs the key to changing behavior, and how do we even discover what those beliefs are? Because I think sometimes we don't even know what's driving that behavior, or even
Yeah.
driving the unwanted behavior we have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you dive deeper into that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, beliefs are, as I define them, a belief is something that feels most true to me right now. And so
Mm.
oftentimes, I think, especially I see among Christian women, we know how to think about things. We know what the right thing to say is. We know what the Sunday school answer is. It's always Jesus, by the way. And we know all the things, but what feels most true to us doesn't always line up with what we know to be true. And we can tell that because we go, oh, why did I do that thing again? Or why didn't I do that thing again? That's when we know that we've got a disconnect between what we know is true and what feels true to us. And so oftentimes, like, I think when we examine those kind of mess up moments where I didn't do the thing I wanted to do, or I did the thing I didn't want to do, those are our cues to go, there's that disconnect there. And so to really, I think the body is really important in finding beliefs. So going, where do I feel that in my body? Where do I feel that, oh man, I messed up again in my body? And kind of examining like what that feeling has to tell us.
That's really helpful. It feels like that's one of the most common, that disconnect is one of the most common barriers that we see in actually
Mm-hmm.
experiencing change. You sort of mentioned this a little bit, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit more into the role of our mind, our body,
Mm-hmm.
and our spirits in the change process.
Yeah. So whenever I say mind, I mean all of it, right? Like I think oftentimes whenever we say mind, we think like our frontal lobe, like the thinking part of our brain, the part that can analyze and wants to like love, like reason. But also our brain is our limbic system, which is in the middle, and that's the seat of our emotions right there. And as well as our brain stems. And so, and when a baby's developing, it's developing its brain from the bottom to the top. And so those connections between our lower brain and our limbic system are actually really a whole lot stronger than the connections between our limbic system and our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobes don't fully come online until we're 25 years old,
That's
maybe a little
wild.
bit younger for women sometimes. So yeah, so please keep that in mind when working with women under
This is
25.
really helpful. Yeah.
They're still technically in adolescence. And so I just want to give a book recommendation really fast called
Please.
Brainstorm. Yep, it's by Dan Siegel. And it talks about the adolescent brain. And I think it makes so much more sense, because I think to an adult, an adolescent brain is like, have you lost your mind? And the answer is actually yes. They lose about half of their neural connections when they reach adolescence, and then they start to rebuild them. So
Wow.
yeah. And if you think about trauma happening during that time, then it's like those neural connections don't get wired the way that they should. So there's a lot of rewiring that has to go on. So when I talk about the brain, it's like, it's not only your thought life, but it's your emotions as well. And so that connection between my emotions and my body is a lot stronger than the connections between my emotions and my thoughts.
Right.
And if we have any trauma, especially in adolescence, then that connection between emotions and thoughts is not getting connected the way that it should and wired the way that it should.
Wow, that's
Um,
really, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So like with that, we know that um, we always want to like change people's thoughts, right? Especially in the West, but to help them understand the connection between, like, you will feel a feeling in your body before your brain can put a word to it. So if we can really start to help people go, where do you feel that in your body? Where do you feel that in your body? That's probably like one of the most common questions I ask people. And a lot of times I just get blank stares. And I will probably get blank stares more from adults than I do actual adolescents. Because we are just so, I think, especially as women, taught to disconnect from our bodies from a
Right.
very early age. And so we really have to be running that connection of where do I feel that in my body? Because if I can get on top of where anxiety or anger or sadness is in my body, then I can start to put a pause in between my emotion and my action, better than if I were to be like, what feeling am I feeling right now? Right. If I can just be like, oh, there's that chest feeling again, that means I need to pause. We'll get a lot more traction that way.
Wow, that's really helpful, especially as we work with women who have experienced a lot of trauma. I think knowing that disconnect between emotion and like thought, I had not thought about that in that way. And even just like, yeah, I think we can get really frustrated with how long it takes to change, or yeah, there's like this discouragement, or I can see how like maybe we can like get in our heads about like, oh, I'm not doing enough to help this person change, or I'm not doing enough to help this person change their thoughts. So I would love to jump into a more like the positive component of the conversation of what are some disciplines, choices, mindsets that we can be mindful or watch for when it comes to supporting someone who wants to change, right? So maybe we have someone who comes to us and we sort of feel like there's a lot stuck up against them. So like trauma or anxiety or lack of support. How can we be mindful, and what can we be aware of as we're trying to support them?
Yeah. So I think one is that we don't want, I think we're so kind of geared towards getting away from a victim mindset. And I'm all for that, right? Like I want people to take the agency that they have now and do something with it. I don't know that we always spend enough time validating like the emotion of what happened to you was terrible. And so I think one tool that I like to give people is to understand the difference between control, influence, and no control. So in control, I have agency over the process and the outcome. That's me getting dressed in the morning. I pick out my clothes. I put them on my body. No one else is doing that for me. I don't have a valet. I just watched Downton Abbey. So no valet. And influence is I have control over the process, but not the outcome. This is me trying to dress my 5-year-old. It's a whole thing every morning,
sure.
right? Because he has his own agency, so I can pick out clothes for him, and he can refuse to put them on.
Yeah.
And no control is that I have no agency in the process or the outcome. And so I think that a lot of times people who are victims of trauma had no control over things that they should have had control and agency over, like their own bodies, for instance. And so that gets wired in their brain that I have no control over my body. And so we need to validate, like, I understand that there was times in your life where you didn't have control in situations that you should have been able to have at least influence in. And that is not okay. And what happened to you is not okay. And like validate the feeling and validate the result of that, right? Which is that their brain got wired in a way that says, I don't have any control. But to also bring them and connect them to, like, you have agency now, and how are you going to use that now? I think another tool too is that we do not always go down basic enough. And this is not to be patronizing or anything. I have to examine this for myself all the time. We don't go basic enough. So like, are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you hydrating well? And if like those are things that I work with people for a long time, because I know we're not going to see significant change if their sleeping, eating, and hydrating are not improving at least.
Yeah. That's actually really helpful. I feel like most of the time when I'm like feeling a certain way, I like, if I can just think about I'm like, oh, I haven't eaten in like 8 hours. I need to get some protein.
Of course I'm cranky. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, why am I so mad or anxious? That's actually really helpful. And the validating the result, I feel like we always validate the feeling and what's happened, but I feel like validating the result is often like forgotten about. And so that's really helpful. I also
and
want
by
to talk
validating and by validating, like, I just mean like it makes sense what like A to B, that makes sense, and you don't even have to say like that what happened to them was valid or anything like that, but just to go, it makes sense why you're here.
And I feel like that just creates an openness and a trust that I'm like, I understand why this is happening. I understand, like, I'm not just like assuming that you should be over here when you're over here, and giving them space and time to feel known and seen, and that there is a level of safety in the conversation, that they're not like expected to be somewhere they can't
Yeah.
be right now. On the other hand, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit more on how we can support someone who maybe doesn't want to change but needs to change.
Yeah. In counseling, we call that resistance.
I love that.
Yeah. And you know, we teach to roll with the resistance. I think that there's a couple different techniques we can use. There's the direct challenge of like just reflecting to them, like I'm seeing that like there's a part of you that's kind of resisting this change. Tell me more about that. Right. So let's approach it with curiosity. Let's approach it with kindness. Again, with that validation of like, there's a reason they're resisting this. And so when if I can help them to self-examine and go, you know, what's going on inside of you, what's going on inside your thoughts, what's going on inside your emotions, what's going on inside your body, um that where do you feel that resistance in your body, tell me more about that. um that's a way to directly challenge it while still maintaining that posture of curiosity and kindness. As well
I
as
love that.
sometimes like they can, if you just roll with it, especially again, if we go back to like that adolescent mind, sometimes like I'll just roll with it and be like, oh, where would we go from here? You know, like if you're being resistant or you're to my idea, tell me what your idea is.
Mm,
And then we just take it. And usually, like, if we can just take them down that path of what they think they should be doing,
yeah,
you can usually see where that's going to land. They can't. So, like, let's just let their mind go down that thought path.
yeah,
Because that is teaching their brain to think about the outcome before they actually make a decision.
that's really interesting and helpful. I feel like I need to do that with myself. Like sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do this, but if I can get all the way to like, where will this lead me? That can
Hmm.
be very
Yeah.
helpful.
I just want to sit on the couch and watch Netflix and not uh, do my application paper. That's me right now. Not write my application paper. But if I think about like, if I continue to do this for so long, where's that going to lead me? Well, I'm going to miss the
Yeah,
deadline or I'm going to be
yeah,
rushed and stressed. So that's
yeah,
my choice. Do I want to be rushed and stressed later or do I want to like be thoughtful about it now?
yeah. That's helpful. Are you watching anything good on Netflix that's preventing you from your application paper?
Well, we're currently watching The Chosen. I
Oh,
know I'm so behind the curve, guys, but it is so good. It is so good. Also, the Downton movie, the newest Downton movie, is also on Amazon Prime, so I highly recommend that as well.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those
Mhm.
good
Yeah.
recommendations with us. Just sprinkle them in. Okay, I don't know if we can actually know the answer to this question, but I'm hoping that there are maybe some flags that can point us one way or the other. So how do we know if is there a difference actually between real change and temporary behavior shifts? Like, can we tell the difference?
You can tell with time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can change kind of two different ways. We can change from the inside out or we can change from the outside in. And so I think outside in is the one that we're most familiar with, right? If I just start
Mm-hmm.
doing the thing that I want to do, eventually it becomes a habit. Eventually I see the benefits of it. That outside change is also like I'm changing for a reward or to avoid a punishment. Okay. We cannot underestimate how important it is of a motivator to avoid punishment. And I think knowing your person too, of the people that you're helping, like, are you motivated more by rewards or avoiding punishment? I have a kid that's kind of on both. Like one kid does one and one kid does the other. So I always have to like kind of think through that. Um, so yeah, so I think that outside in change is what we're most familiar with. And it's what we always go to first, right? Of like showing them the reward that they'll get or trying to help them avoid the punishment. And that can get people into habits where hopefully maybe they see the benefit of that new behavior. But also, and sometimes that's important because it's like we have to change now. There is a deadline to this change. Um, but I think that inside out change is almost harder, and it's harder, I think, to lead people through. So that's where I think that understanding the belief level of what's driving my behavior in the first place, my unwanted behavior, is important. But like those usually are connected to a negative belief. So belief
Mhm.
is again what feels most true to you, but it's also that I am statement. And so it's going to fit into one of three categories usually, it's going to fit into our value and worth. So I am worthless. I am trash.
Mm.
Nobody loves me. It's going to fit into power and control. I'm helpless. I should have done something. Or it's going to fit into like our personal safety of like, I'm not safe. I can't trust the world, that kind of a thing. And they tend to be really blanket statements, right? Like, I'm not safe. And so I think, again, that's where we validate there was a time in your life where you weren't safe.
Mhm.
And I get that. And your brain wired that. So it takes 3 seconds for our brain to encode a memory of pain or shame. And it takes
Mm.
30 to 90 seconds for our brains to encode a memory of joy. So if
Wow.
I've lived in an environment that was full of pain and full of shame, my brain is just automatically sponging up every bad thing and always trying to keep me safe and out of situations. So if we can help them reflect on that was true and it doesn't have to be true now, how can we take small steps where we can believe I am safe, where we can believe I am worthy, where we can believe that I do have control in some areas of my life? Where can we just take tiny steps where our behavior starts to tell our body what is actually true?
Mhm. Mhm. Wow, that's really interesting. Uh, yeah, I think, I mean, we spent so much of our upbringing is like absorbing these things that we believe
Mhm.
about ourselves. And I know personally for myself, it takes a long time to like reset your brain on like God's truth over your life, or
Absolutely.
how you can yeah. So this question might be more of a reinforcement to what you have already shared, but I just want to give us some like quick things we can start with. So if we want to be people who practice what we preach, what are a few no-brainers we can start with when we are encouraging people in this process?
Um, so yeah, I think one is modeling. So to
Mm.
like depending on how much like you're living life with the people that you're helping, and in my case it's not very much, right? Like I'm not seeing clients
Right.
that much outside, except for when we randomly run into each other in Target. And then I have to go in my brain, how do I know you? Because it's like there's just this great wall of China um between like my work and my office and like my outside life. So yeah, so oftentimes like I need to remember like what are the examples in my life where that I can bring into counseling
Mm.
that really show this. And sometimes they're embarrassing things to bring up, but it's like I have to remember that my clients and the people that I'm helping they're feeling embarrassment. They're feeling hesitation to bring this thing up. And so can I find a time in my life where I felt the same way to relate to that? And I think also to condense that story would be would be a tip that I've learned over 10 years.
Mm.
To be able to condense that story where it's really straight to the point, and I'm not taking too much of their time to tell their story to me.
That's good.
But it's like it's modeling that through stories. And so I think that would probably be the number one thing. And then also to I just cannot stress enough the mind body connection. That has been something I've been really passionately pursuing knowledge on in the last year. And so, as much as we can say, like maybe even starting with like, just close your eyes and tune into your body and like tell me what you're feeling right now. Or if they're getting really agitated or, really emotive,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that they're feeling some big feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we can just pause and say, like, what does your body feel like right now? Okay. And then name the emotion so that we can start to really tread that neural pathway of my body, what my body's feeling, what my limbic system is telling my system, as well as like naming that emotion.
That's really helpful. I love the relating. I feel like I'm so much more comfortable when someone shares something that I've been through.
Mhm.
I'm like so much more willing to share, or like truly open up with someone when they're like, me too. I'm like, oh, good. And
And on
then, yeah,
that, oh,
go
well,
ahead.
just to say too, like, and to hit a felt need, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I have not been through a lot of the trauma that my clients have been through. But I can hit on and emphasize that I'm hitting on um feeling embarrassed, of feeling out of control. And I'll even say, like, I know this is not even a drop in the bucket of what you've been through. Just to recognize that too. Because I think sometimes I've seen like pushback and resistance whenever I'm not recognizing that, like, my story is not, I'm not trying to compare it. I'm
Totally,
just trying to
totally.
relate. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like you're, I mean, sort of just relating to the emotion rather than like
Hmm.
the circumstance, because
Right. Yeah.
everybody's circumstance is different. That's really a great thing to call out, just to be able to be hitting a felt need that they
Hmm.
are like wrestling with. Okay, before we get into Q&A, my question for you is, what is one piece of advice you would want to share with our advocates who are day in and day out texting with moms, working with moms, they're meeting them in person, they're meeting them on Zoom? What would you say to us here on the call and those who will be listening later?
To take care of yourself. That self-care is not,
Unexpected.
yeah, that self-care is not selfish at all.
Mhm.
It's just like taking care of your car. Like, if you ignore your oil light for long enough, like, your car's just going to seize up and die. That almost happened to a friend of mine.
Oh no, oh
She was like,
no.
I just didn't know what it meant. And I'm like, your oil light, man. Um, it's fine. It's fine. So yeah, to take care of yourself, because you are pouring out so much, and you can't, I mean, it's all the cliche things, guys. You got to put on your oxygen mask first. You can't pour from an empty
Yeah.
vessel, blah, blah, blah. Like, we do that. So here are my like three super quick self-care categories. Okay. Because self-care is not always a pedicure. Okay.
Yes.
I think that would be treating yourself. And I'm down with treating yourself. Trust me. I am an Enneagram 7. We are here for the treats. Um, all about it. But so my thing is to think through these things in mind, body, and spirit. Okay.
Mm,
So the first one is retreat. What has been too much of my in my life or my day that I need to start to retreat from? So for me, that is noise and listening to people, or just listening.
mm,
So I usually drive home in silence. It's only 12 minutes, so it's not that bad. Um, but I have to like actively be like, don't turn on a podcast. You've just been listening to people for 7 hours.
totally.
Um, so retreat from what has been too much, even if it's a good thing. Restore. So what's been depleted in my life that I need to restore. Again, I go back to just like eating and drinking and sleeping
Mm,
like we should. That one I start with body on that one. And then when I've done retreat, when I've done restore, how can I reinvest my time and resources right now so that future me will be thankful?
I
So
love
to me,
that.
this is meal prepping. This is writing out my meals for the week. I don't prep
Yeah.
food ahead of time. I don't know. That's not my
It's
thing.
a preference. I don't do that either. So you're not
Yeah.
alone in this
I
call.
just want to be able to also decide that day, do I actually want to do this?
Hmm.
Is this what I want to eat? So yeah, so this would be meal prepping. This is like laying out clothes. This is the planning stuff, that so that you can be in a mindset to decide and not have to decide in the moment. Because if you tell me in the moment, like ask me in the moment, what are we having for dinner? I'm like, I don't know. And then it ends up being Chick-fil-A. And then your local Chick-fil-A dude knows you by name. It's fine. It's fine. Guys, it's fine.
It's
Part of
okay.
my New Year's resolution and change was to eat less Chick-fil-A.
At least you're not going on Sundays. You have a day of, you know, cooking at home. That is actually, those three things are so helpful. I have not thought about it in that order, and reinvesting is like maybe in that place there's a treat that you can reinvest into
Yes.
yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, that's really insightful. And I think that sometimes we do feel selfish or we don't prioritize it because
Hmm.
we have so many competing priorities. Like majority of the women on this call have a million things that they're working on and also doing to support the moms that they're serving. And so just taking some time to prioritize is really, really helpful. Um, okay, so we're going to read some of the questions that were dropped into the chat. I'm going to start with Charlie's question, which is, if I'm working with a mom who's unmotivated to change, but might not see herself that way, what is the most important thing I can do or practice in my relationship with her?
Well, that is tough. I have some
That's
people popping.
validating. That's validating that
Yes.
that's tough.
I have some people popping into my mind. I think one would be for your personal mindset to go to not take responsibility for more than what is yours, right? Like you can bring the knowledge, you can bring the challenges, you can bring the reflection of like, I'm not really seeing that you're wanting to change here. Like, tell me more about that, that curiosity piece. But I think more than anything, it's like you are not actually responsible for her change. You have influence, right? You have some agency in the process, but you do not have control. You do not have agency in the outcome. And I think too, to remember that prayer is probably the most important thing that we can do for the
Mm,
people that we want to help change,
mm,
because prayer is what says, I don't have control here, but I do know the one that does. And I'm going to
yeah,
trust in that.
that's a really good grounding reminder that we
Mm,
can't change people, although we want to. Okay, so
frequently.
how would you work with a mom who is always blaming others for her mistakes or for her actions?
Ooh, that is tough. Um, One thing that I would want um, people to know a little bit more about would be like some mental health diagnoses. Like when you say that, certain things pop into my head.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say like, please don't go around being like, I think you're diagnosed with this if you are not credentially qualified to do that. Okay. Um, but to go there are so many things that are happening in people's minds where I think if we get a grip on like, oh, this could be like a mental health concern, I think that will
Mm,
again reinforce like what I don't have control over. And I think too, the way forward, even if someone's resistant, even if someone doesn't show any interest in stop blaming people, is to just keep treading that relationship, because that blame of other people is going back to an attachment wounding
mm, mm, mm.
always. And so the way we correct that is through a corrective attachment experience. So you are the bigger, stronger, wiser, kind person. That's from Circle of Security, by the way. Another good book to read.
Nice.
You are the bigger, stronger, wiser, kind person that they should have had, but didn't have. And so it's not just that I am only validating and only nurturing, but I'm also adding that structure into their life where I am maybe challenging, like, was any of this like what was yours to take on in this situation? If you just name one thing, right? Like nothing is ever typically one person's fault, right? Like kind of if we kind of bring it to the extremes for them, and I think a playfully engaging way,
Yeah.
sometimes people can pick up on that. And so to bring as so much nurture, but also to bring that structure, and again, knowing that they may never respond the way that we see that they should,
Mm-hmm.
but you are treading that pathway of like of modeling the thoughtful process of how to analyze my behavior, but you're also modeling being that attachment figure that they did not have.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, knowing that there's an attachment wound in so many ways, almost all of our lives, I feel like is so helpful to keep in mind as we are loving these women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have another question about how would you discuss with a client her pattern of frequently not showing up for appointments, yet they keep asking to reschedule?
Oh, I would set I well, again, I'm coming from the clinical background of like I'm setting a boundary and being like, we are not we're not rescheduling until, such and such a time. So like I would maybe again, I'm not 100% sure like all of y'all's rules and things. So like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't know how much this is going to line up, but like if there's appointments on a Monday and they're like always like, can I reschedule? Can I reschedule? It's like, not this week, but let's meet next week. Is this time still good for you?
Yeah.
So that there's not this like out of like, I can just perpetually reschedule and like, but still see you this week and still kind of check that off my list. So that could be maybe a boundary to happen. Um, yeah. So I think probably having some more like, some more boundaries there. I'm probably talk to like your people about what those should be. Cause I'm like, I'm charging you a late cancellation fee and you're not coming back until you pay me that. So
Yeah.
that's not y'all's situation.
Well, I do think that having a consequence, so like what you're saying,
Hmm.
like maybe, hey, sorry, this week I'm already booked. So
Hmm.
if there is like, if you can't actually schedule it for the week, understanding that there is a consequence to not showing up, and
Yeah.
in a loving way. Like, of course, we're not going to leave you stranded, but what does this look like for the day to day of
Yeah.
your plan? Okay, you mentioned that usually there's a disconnect from emotions and where it is coming from in the body for most adults. How do we actually feel where something is coming from in the body, and how do we help a person identify it as well? That is a hard question for you.
Yeah. So I would say I would reserve that question for people, I would reserve asking that question to other people until you kind of have a handle on it for yourself. Um, because
Mm,
I don't know. I think they're going to have questions and it's not going to make sense to you if
you've
you're not
never
going to be able to
experienced
help
that.
them if you've never
Yeah.
experienced that. Yeah. So I think it just takes a lot of like those mindfulness practices of just like when you know you're feeling a big emotion, you know that somehow, right? A lot of that's going to be in our brain, but if you can just sit in that moment and go like, what does my body feel like right now? I think you'll start to notice things along like just to give you a list of things to check in on. What's your heart rate doing? How's your breathing going? What does your whole digestive tract feel like? What's your perspiration doing right now?
Mm,
Is your mouth dry? How do your limbs feel? Because all of those things are physiologically, there's stuff going on in your body when that adrenaline pumps up that's going to make some things happen in those different systems. I could get really nerdy with you about what that is, but usually people get bored. So
honestly, I'm like, we gotta bring you back to do a whole workshop
oh,
on
we
that.
should do
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Okay, we have another question. How do you get the mother to work towards better or gain insight when every other aspect of her life is falling apart? That's a really
Mm,
good question.
yeah. I kind of sometimes bring it back to control, right? Like to really validate there are so many things in your life that you have very little
Mm-hmm.
influence and no control over. And that is awful. That feels terrible. And just to
Mm-hmm.
validate that feeling and then to go, it doesn't like, but not everything in your life you have no control over. So let's just get down to those basic things. Again, like, do you have control over when you go to sleep? Do you have
Mm-hmm.
control over, somewhat over the food that you take in? How can we get you hydrated? Um, and to really like reframe those as victories because again, if you don't have those basic things, then like change is going to be really hard. And also that you have control over the way that you react and respond to things too, right? And how you're going to think about
Yeah.
these things. Is my life falling apart? Um, or are there things in my life that are falling away too, right? Like some of it is going to be
Yeah.
falling apart, right? But are there things in my life that are also falling away? Like that relationship wasn't that great in the first place. Is it falling away so that better things can come? Right.
That's
So like
really,
I think another tool would be like a reframe.
yeah, I'm literally writing all of these things down. That's a really great question, Leonte. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we have a question from Donna about the self-care piece that you were just sharing. So she shares that she spent 4 years taking care of her husband who died 2 years ago, and she's really struggling with self-care for herself. She finds herself doing all the things that she's trying to catch up on, rather than taking care of herself. So how can she help herself?
So I think scheduling it is a big thing.
Mm,
And that like rest is not something we earn. And I think that's really, really hard for women. And I think that's really hard in our Western society because, again, we're always told like you can do that when your work is finished. You can have that treat when you've eaten your dinner, that kind of a thing. And those are good disciplines to get into, right? My kids would just eat sweets all day if I let them.
Right.
Um, but like now we're an adult, now we have a frontal lobe that's functioning, and hooray for that. And so I think sometimes we have to uncover like what are those beliefs that come from our parents just trying to teach us basic discipline. I think one of those beliefs is that rest is earned. And that's just not true, right? Like God created rest just as a rule.
Hmm.
Like it's an actual rule.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we've got to take his example and the creation story, as well as like it's literally in the 10 Commandments to stop working. Um, and that's so like countercultural, especially whenever life is really hard and harsh.
Yeah.
So like rest is not earned, and so why, like why are you feeling that way that rest is earned? Also, not to get too counselly too, but like are we also avoiding grief by being productive? Just a
Mm,
question to examine.
mm,
I like
mm.
avoiding grief by being productive, so I'm just saying other people might too.
Yeah, that's a really great like reflection point. I followed this influencer on Instagram, and she just created all of these merch opportunities for us to buy. And they say rest, she has all these sweatpants that say rest is productive. And
Mm.
I was like, oh, maybe I should buy that and spend my money on this merch that will help me lay on the couch.
It'll just
So
remind you. Yeah.
just a reminder when I see myself in the mirror. Okay, one last question. When a client remains silent and very emotional, which would be a good approach to like sort of get some opening up?
Yeah. So one is for you to like understand how you're reacting to that moment,
Mm,
whether they're being silent or they're being like uh, belligerent or like all kinds of things that could be happening there. One is to be aware of like how you're reacting to that and really trying to stay like present in your mind body connection as much as possible, so that you're coming from a place of like calm, compassionate care, and not
mm,
from a place of reactivity, and not from like a fight, flight, or freeze place. Also, want to
okay.
validate like all those things are kind of scary. And so if you're getting into some fight, flight, or freeze initially, like that makes sense. Like let's just notice that and figure out how to like, remain in the moment and kind of do that cognitive coping of like, I'm not actually in danger here unless you are, in which case like respond, like let your flight take off. Okay. Um, so yeah, just to like have that cognitive coping of like, this is I am safe, right? This is not a danger to me. Even though they're having really big emotions right now. So I think and I kind of want to speak to both ends, because I think that we either get shut down people or we get like kind of the crazy angry. That can be scary too. um that if they're kind of like way up here, we want to be that calm presence, right? So kind of going back to like the nerdy stuff, we have mirror neurons in our brains, and so what the other person is doing, our brain wants to start to like react to. So like when you
Yeah.
smile at a baby and they smile back,
Yeah.
um so if they're up here, we want to be as steady as possible, and so that their mirror, we don't want to reflect them, we want them to reflect us.
Hmm.
And again, just like validating that emotion and reflecting that, I see how you're feeling right now, it looks like you're really angry, I totally get it. And just treading that same line. I think sometimes when people are up here, and it's like, oh, I said something and it's not hitting, and I said something and it's not hitting. um that can kind of feed into the emotion, us like kind of being all over the place. And if it's just, we are just validating, we're just reflecting, and we kind of keep saying the same thing, that kind of brings people down a little bit sooner
Hmm.
sometimes. Again, you're not in control of that. I think if people are really low, like the question asked of like, I'm just in the emotion. One, if they're comfortable with being touched, like I think that's a time to like have a hand on a shoulder or something like that. And because that connection, so in that case, they're in dorsal vagal nerve. again, it's like I have to like reel myself in from being too nerdy. But they're in their dorsal vagal nerve right then, and so that means that their frontal lobe is pretty shut off.
Mm,
And how we get them out of dorsal and into ventral, which is also called your social engagement system, is social engagement. So when people are shut down, we want to stay really connected to them. I think we want to like talk softly to them. I think that's one where you kind of want to match them a little bit. You kind of want to go down with them, reflecting how I think it looks like you're feeling really sad. It looks like you're feeling really overwhelmed by that. And just reminding them like that you're here, and that they are like in a safe place right now. And that what they're going through is hard and that change is hard. Just again, validating where they are, reflecting where they are. And then bringing them like when they're in that ventral vagal nerve, they can be reconnected to their whole brain.
mm,
And then that's where we can start the the really cognitive stuff of like reframing and seeing where they need to go and everything like that. So when people are in really high emotions, we want to stay like emotion body centered, and how we speak to them, and then bring them into like kind of that learning place, because when we're in the extremes, we can't learn.
yeah, I mean, I've learned that with my 2-year-old that
Uh-huh. Yep.
you just can't teach when they're upset. They have to sort of come back to. Phoebe,
Mhm.
this has been so helpful. I've learned so much, and I honestly feel like we could talk all day about some of this
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
We'll definitely have to make a plan to bring you back to talk about all the things that you were just briefly touching on that I think you could dive a lot deeper into. Um, yeah, I thank you so much for your questions, Donna. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing. We are going to be praying for you. Um, but we will follow up with some of the recommendations on books that Phoebe was sharing, so you guys can, or any other resources, Phoebe, that you have that would be helpful
Yeah,
for
I'll have to
listeners.
email you because a bunch of them came to mind.
Great, that's perfect. We love to do a little recap right after our workshops with some of the things you shared and some highlights. So we'll make sure to include those. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This was so fun for me personally to just get to chat with you and to be with all of you this Friday. So we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.